Okay, hello. So I'm going to be talking about another set of fun with bioinformatics, the Francis Crick Institute. We haven't done any fantastic developments like Gillian did, so it's more of a, I suppose, this is our experience with EasyBuild. That's me. That's Francis Crick Institute, so quite a large, effectively one single department biomedical organisation. Oh, sorry, I'm going in the wrong direction. But I thought it'd be interesting to talk about my sort of personal background a little bit, which does inform my perspective with EasyBuild. So 2 jobs ago, I was working at University of Manchester in life sciences, and I started building RPMs because at that stage that was an improvement. And I became a Fedora packager, and I started encountering all the hilarity of the different build systems that don't really build. But it also, something I do miss in EasyBuild is the sort of metadata that you have in RPM. So you've got a proper change log. You know who did what. I think that on the one hand, you don't want to reinvent everything to become like everything else, but anyway, that's sort of my perspective. Next, I was at Imperial College working on CMS, and there you've got 20 years of history of people providing software their own way. There's a lot of people working on it. It's just kind of working. You're just the next person who helps it work. It's very mature. Towards the end of my time there, people started using CERM CVMFS, which I think Bart is going to talk about later on. And it's similar to the work that Michael was talking about on Alice. So it's sort of a solved problem, except for the clashes between the site environment and what the experiments expect. So different versions of CentOS versus Ubuntu, that kind of thing. So then I moved here. The exciting context there was we've got this massive new building, and we're moving from 3 sites dispersed around London, and these sites themselves had in some cases 100 years of history. They've all got their own creative ways of doing things. They had more or differing levels of central support, so in many cases research groups had to do things themselves because they weren't central services. They're moving into this environment where people on my team and other teams were providing central services, so it's a cultural change, if nothing else. And we had this process called migration, which there was this whole team of project managers doing migration, and migration was the big buzzword, and there was transition. And one of the big concerns was migrating the data from the existing sites, and that sort of that meant that took a lot of our time, which we would have liked to spend on providing software, so it was not helpful. So my specific context when I started using EasyBuild is that I'm inheriting a diversity of users who have a series of small clusters I would think of as legacy clusters that had effectively been abandoned during this migration process. They just kept them working. Most of the users had never used modules at all. There was one bioinformatics group that just started using them. They tended to have just a massive directory, and they would have a symbolic link to whichever one they would preferred at the moment. And they'd have handcrafted shell profile paths, which is obviously the most robust system you could possibly imagine. So what is the solution? Maybe it's EasyBuild. I first started using it on the eMedLab Research Cloud, of which the Crick is one of the consortium members. It's across a lot of London and South East institutions. And the way it would work is that there would be someone called a project system administrator who would be assigned to the scientists and would help them get their workflows working on the cloud. So I did that for some of the Crick groups, and I started using EasyBuild. because that was much easier for providing R, and they had their own in-house R extensions. They always needed a specific version of R, specific versions of Perl, and compared to how I'd done this in the past, this was so much easier. This saved me so much time. And on a larger scale, we've got a brand new cluster in the Crick. It's quite small, but it's just enough to get us going and to move people from the old hardware that's being thrown away. It's about 3,000 cores, about 5 petabytes. It's mostly using FOSS for similar reasons that Gillian mentioned, that it's just easier to build a lot of this stuff with FOSS. You quite often need to patch it with Intel. We do have some users who actually rely on Intel. We've got some small GPU users and people who've just used the Intel compiler in the past. Currently, as of last night, 683 modules going up all the time in the main area, the equivalent of the sort of golden area that Damien was talking about yesterday, and 119 in a rough development area. So what's it been like for this group of 1,200 scientists who are not used to this kind of system? There was just general befuddlement because they weren't used to the modules. They weren't used to how do you find software when it's not on the system. This is partly because we just didn't have time to go around giving everyone the training and the familiarization that we would have liked to do, because of that concern over moving the data that I mentioned. So they'd make fantastic puns like this EasyBuild thing isn't actually that easy. But once we actually sat down with them and explained the benefits and explained how it worked, generally they were really enthusiastic and they started using it themselves internally. So I think I know it's an obvious lesson, but you do actually, once you make the time to give people the reasoning behind what you're doing, I think they accept it generally. Yeah, so bioinformatics applications are it's a very fecund area for doing things wrong in lots of different ways, and the bioinformatics groups, they have to work within the jigsaw puzzle. They develop their pipelines which are very fragile, and they come to rely on specific versions, which again EasyBuild helps with. But we've had cases where you've got a distributed research project, people within that project. It's basically the same pipeline, but one of them will say, well, we've got to use PyClone 0.12.3, or no, it's 0.12.7 for us. It's not necessarily a good reason for those, but that's what they want, so that's what we have to give them. And you do worry about the reproducibility of this, but we're hopefully moving people in the right direction just by using things like EasyBuild. Personal impact for me, it made the task feasible. It was intractable otherwise. Once we'd been through these sort of training sessions that I mentioned, they actually personally thanked me and said thank you for making all these applications, because we used to have to build them ourselves. And we're beginning to see, as I say, people taking on slightly more reproducible methods. I've also found it's led me to be better in my work, so I wish I'd known about things like high depths. So I think I saw, if during one of the conference calls, Alan mentioned the setting that you've got here. And we've had problems with code that we've built for the main cluster, but then doesn't work on some legacy servers that survived the big cull that we had. So everything is Intel, but we've got some AMD servers that hadn't been thrown away. And because of the eagerness of the Intel compiler, things like Python just don't work, which is a bit annoying. But actually they were quite happy, because then they've got a nice excuse to buy some new servers. Yeah, so as I mentioned, it's already beginning to allow collaboration where once we show them how to do it, they'll start building stuff themselves. So that has led to problems as well, where people start sharing module paths to software that Perl is the particular one. They seem to always like building their own Perl, and then that clashes with the one I've provided, and then stuff stops working. So that's another set of a good practice that we need to help. And I definitely want to talk to Marcus about the more organized way of handling this sort of different sources of dependencies. I think I've said enough about bioinformatics, but maybe people like Robert and Pablo, maybe Gillian as well, maybe we could make and Fotis, maybe we could, in a more organized way, try and deal better with the bioinformatics packages like Fotis did originally.
Exactly my mind. Get together and discuss.
Yes. Yes. Thinking about what we were talking about yesterday about the hierarchical scheme, I think I agree with Kenneth's point that from a user's point of view, it's the wrong way around at the moment. If I said to a lot of my users, choose your MPI stack, they've got no idea what I'm talking about. There were 2 or 3 groups that use MPI and everyone else has no idea. Or the compiler, they don't really care.
You say it's backwards. What's an ideal user case? Imagine what the user should see.
Application first.
But a group of applications?
Maybe. I mean, I liked Gillian's sort of workflow-based approach, which I hadn't thought of doing. I'm open to suggestion, really.
Yeah,
at the moment, I just have everything flat.
I want you to suggest to me as well.
Yeah. Just to add a bit on that, I think it also depends a bit on your user base. If your user base is homogeneous, you can offer sensible approach, default view that packs the software that they need, and they don't have to choose anything else. If you have something more heterogeneous, something more mixed, then it gets a bit more tricky. What I think it makes sense maybe in our cases to offer a default view for a default tool chain where they have everything, all kind of codes that are for a default tool chain, and simply provide that as default. That might make sense. And then power users will be able to still see different compilers and be able to take it from there.
Yeah.
That might be a sensible approach as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. Maybe different views for different sorts of users with different experience. Yes.
But on that case, for us, the question becomes what should be the default, because we have to provide something that when you log in the system, what do you see, and then from there on, the user might choose, I want to view it in this way or this other way. But providing a default view for everyone, that's what I found more problematic, because there will be always people that don't like it. So how do you provide something that makes sense for everyone on the system? That's the tricky part for me.
So some more general observations about EasyBuild. I think I've seen it mentioned on some mailing lists where people will say SPAC is more technically correct, whatever that means. They don't really say what that means. But in my experience, it's the strength of the community trumps any kind of technical merit. EasyBuild is certainly technically good enough. And I found it extremely welcoming. The community is extremely helpful. It's exactly how an open source project should work. I feel like I can go to Kenneth within reason and he'll help me out, and I would do the same. I don't know whether maybe that would have happened with SPAC, but I get the impression maybe not. Don't know.
I'm live and Todd may still be awake. Um, in my view, the SPAC community is and also considers themselves more advanced. It basically comes back to the kind of expectation they have that you're a software developer, which most of us here, I think, are not. And also, we deal with users that are less advanced than the SPAC community does. So most of their users, that I think, are also software developers and know how to juggle dependencies around and know how to write a little bit of Python to get stuff done. Which is, I mean, if you're working with bioinformaticians, forget it. I mean, you just have to give them this command, do this module load, and everything that you need is there. Your script will work. That's what you have to give them. So it's we're like more dumbed down, if you want to say it like that, which I think is a good thing. I mean, again, the new PR stuff we have also makes it a lot easier for people to contribute back, even if they don't know any Git. I mean,
I wouldn't say dumbed down, I'd just say it's a different compromise, different set of compromises. But yeah, it's worked really well for me. Other observations, I think there is a set of knowledge that I think people like Kenneth and Robert and Pablo and Damien maybe know. It's internalized because you've been part of developing the project, developing the knowledge that you assume everyone else knows, but maybe you don't, that maybe we don't. So things like the reasoning behind the minimal tool chains, that's just an example. It's just, I suppose that just means the constant battle to improve the documentation. But I do feel like you sort of superpower users, developers, know things that we don't.
for the minimal toolkit specifically, there's papers.
There is, but I feel like there's more. Anyway, it's just a small point.
Put you in perspective. I think that's long before the minimal tool chains were there. I'm just giving an encouragement message here that I've been long before the minimal tool chains were there, and I have still not caught up to speed with exactly how they behave. I know they exist, and I will be basically doing exactly what you will do. Give it a try out and see how it works. Yeah.
So I think I think in bioinformatics we use a lot more flat than hierarchical, just because again going back to what you were saying about the users. So I'm also not playing around a lot with the minimal tool chains, except when it's talked about. You're probably right about that. We have this internalization because we get to this feedback often with EasyBuild where we end up with building everything based on whatever FOSS, but there's GCC and they're shared for many different tool chains, and you see that we're rebuilding some stuff that's redundant. And so there's a shortcut there. When they say they're doing it and it works, it's like, I get it, because I'm like, because of the experience, for sure. It makes sense to me what it will accomplish. The implementation, other than it's gotten in the way of, now easy configs have to be available in the path, which they didn't have to before, so it changes my build. Like I'm trying to build something, it doesn't build anymore because I did a amend or a try software version, and it put the easy config into the software, but not into the path where it can find it. So now I have to manipulate my builds more. So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that goes on, but I haven't. Sometimes we don't. I may be in the same boat more with you on some of these things, but we don't. Like I don't say anything because I don't need it. And it certainly can be confusing when you're going to the meetings or listening in to people that have gone to more of them.
Yes.
It is difficult to onboard. It's a good comment. I think it's worthwhile.
I just want to add something there. That's part of the reason I want to go to flat easy configs is to make this stuff easier, right? So like you use a flat scheme, so it makes sense that it builds with FOSS, right? But in reality, you just need GCC. So if you had a flat easy config, you stick the two in there, knowing that they're exactly the same, right? And then it becomes, then we can at least collaborate. At the moment, we do our own thing, FOSS does its own thing. The information might not be the same, and we miss something, right? Or vice versa, right? And so this is an issue. It's a trivial issue because both should just work, right? If you had a fat easy config, you know that the exact same thing is happening in both, right? So there's no reason that both shouldn't appear.
Other small comments is that I think it would be good if we could more quickly bring into the main repositories things like that easy update tool that someone mentioned recently that that updates the extensions of things like bioconductor and R. Where it makes sense, they
It's funny. It's just funny because this is like the second or third iteration of the same tool from different people.
yes, yes.
And none of them have ever gotten in. And basically what almost always happens is that whoever contributed it disappears and the tool becomes not maintainable. Even the one that's there is brittle, right? Like,
Yes.
so I think that there's a place that it can exist, but you know, I think taking it into mainline stuff is going to make a mess. Like, it's a little bit orthogonal to your build process. So having it in mainline may actually make it more complicated and less able to be maintained. Because right now, I think you could look at it and maintain it. But if we put it into framework, then forget it.
I suppose if nothing else, then they should at least be better publicised. So as new sites who haven't been on IRC when it was mentioned or something, they should at least be notified, even if, as you say, it may not make sense to embrace them fully.
In my view, it does make sense, and almost for the exact reason that you're talking about. If it's merged into mainline, we'll have proper tests for it, and we'll make sure it doesn't break. We could not necessarily. I mean, if you chop it into pieces and spread it all over framework, sure. Then you make it more complicated. But sure, the style checks are all in one module. It's almost a standalone thing. Yeah, but that's something very small. That's actually something we can fix. It's not too hard to fix it, and you have to know now that you have to add it in 2 places. But that's just hooks into a script that talks to framework, and you could have like for the style test, it's one single Python module. If you only look at that, if you're only concerned about style test, you just look at this, and you leverage some of the functionality that the framework provides, rather than re-implementing stuff in a standalone script. So I think there are good reasons to integrate it into EasyBuild. I personally I have wrappers around EasyBuild to speed up my work.
Good for me.
Then what I would suggest is that that EasyBuild should go towards an API and support the API. Like, the thing is that the tool could definitely use EasyBuild, but then you're just going to use whatever internal functions you have, and you have no committed API to it. Whereas it would be better to just have a good API and then build tools on top of a decent API.
Yeah, maybe I should just poke up there. The API is one part of it. So yeah, if we don't have it integrated, we have to be a little bit more stable about the API. Sometimes things in the framework are now considered as internal to the framework, while people may have scripts that actually leverage them. I try to be careful there and try to make a good estimation of whether it's actually part of the public API or not. So that's certainly one part of it, but it's also the issue you said, like, people contribute scripts to do basically what Easy Update should do, and then they disappear, and they stop working. Keeping a stable API doesn't necessarily mean it's never going to break. There may be changes in the CRAN or CPAN API that enforce you to do updates to the script. If you have it integrated in EasyBuild and you have automatic tests for it, you'll notice when something breaks. But maybe it's a philosophical discussion.
The other points on that slide, I think we're already heading towards anyway. So better linting and maybe local testing using things like Roberts containers. I strongly endorse the better organisation of patch files that I think has already been discussed. I think I mentioned it might be nice to have better metadata. And I think someone else has mentioned, might have been Kenneth, about a more integrated way of allowing for site customization. That would be nice.
I think the metadata thing's very interesting. I think that like if we get into the fat, easy
Yes.
things like the YAML, then imagining, you know, what's in that directory is a lot more of a shared object. Because right now it's a random assortment of contributions of different people that happen to be coordinated around some software. Where when we have a single file that we're maintaining, it's a contributed effort, because you kind of have to think about what other people are doing when if in the hierarchy of whatever we might be building. And then the changelog makes a lot of sense sitting beside it, and also we have less mess around in that directory, so there's space for a changelog there. Like there's right now the part of the thing is just that it would be clutter, and you know, when we have fewer files per directory, it's easier for us to justify having a metadata like a changelog, or maybe a couple changelogs depending on how the I think that it seems maybe not intuitive that it's directly related, but I think that it'll change a culture of contribution that would make a difference to why we would keep these kind of files. So I agree with that for sure.
That's it.